The time is 8:45 p.m. This is the Sri Lanka Broadcasting Corporation. Here is the news edited by Anjana Dodamgoda and read by Tilani Pires. The headlines. President Wickremesinghe sets ambitious timeline for Sri Lanka's debt restructuring and reconciliation efforts. The government orders crackdown on gun violence. Malaysia to increase flights to Sri Lanka. Substantial allowance increment for the army after absence of 4 years. The Navy apprehends 22 Indian fishermen poaching in northern waters. Takazuchi DD-107 of Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force arrives at the port of Colombo. And on international news, the missing Titanic sub running out of oxygen. And on sports news, Brian Pereira qualifies for the Olympic Esports Series 2023 in Singapore. In a determined push to address Sri Lanka's debt crisis and foster reconciliation, President Ranil Wickremesinghe outlined plans to finalize the debt restructuring process by September. Collaborating closely with Parliament, the President aims to develop a comprehensive strategy for resolving the nation's financial burdens, the President's media division said. President Ranil Wickremesinghe participated in the 40th anniversary event of the International Democrat Union in London on the 19th and the 20th of June and joining the forum with former Canadian Prime Minister, Chairman of the IDU, Mr. Stephen Harper. He explained the circumstances that paved the way for his presidency and the country's journey towards economic recovery. Malaysian High Commissioner Badli Hisham acceded to a request made by Prime Minister Dinesh Gunawardena to increase the number of flights between Malaysia and Sri Lanka. He said Malaysian Airlines plans to operate additional flights, while two other airlines, Air Asia and Batik Air, also would like to introduce flights between Kuala Lumpur and Colombo. He said 70 million tourists visit Malaysia annually and Sri Lanka could attract some of them by introducing additional flights. He added that Sri Lanka could be a major airline hub for massive traffic between the west and the east. The substantial increment of around 10,000 rupees for all army personnel, war-affected disabled army personnel and family members of deceased army members to their salaries beginning from April this year has taken place following a prolonged absence of about 4 years under the recommendation of President Ranil Wickremesinghe in response to the request of the Commander of the Army, Lieutenant General Wikum Lianake. This was reportedly the first time such an increased allowance was paid to them after 2019, the Sri Lanka Army said today. The added increment of this allowance, which is particularly considering the financial difficulties of Army members, both living inside and outside for service requirements, serves as a considerable relief to them due to the prevailing economic recession that has occurred in the mid of 2022 and spiraling cost of living. This news broadcast comes to you from the Sri Lanka Broadcasting Corporation. The Sri Lanka Navy has apprehended 22 Indian fishermen along with 4 Indian trawlers poaching in Sri Lankan waters northwest of Delf Island, Jaffna. During a regular patrol conducted by the Navy in Sri Lankan waters to curb illegal fishing practices of foreign fishing trawlers, the Northern Naval Command has deployed fast attack craft of the 4th Fast Attack Flotilla and a craft of Sri Lanka Coast Guard to chase away a cluster of Indian poaching trawlers last night. Having spotted they were engaging in illegal fishing in Sri Lankan waters northwest of Delf Island, whereas the 22 Indian nationals who continue to remain in Sri Lankan waters were held by the Navy. Kazuji DD-107 of the Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force arrived at the port of Colombo on a formal visit this morning. The visiting ship was welcomed by the Sri Lanka Navy in compliance with naval traditions. Defence vessel is a 150.5 meters long destroyer which is manned by a crew of 207. She is commanded by Commander Tanaka Hiroaki. Meanwhile, captain of the ship called on Commander Western Naval Area, Rear Admiral Suresh De Silva at the Western Naval Headquarters today. During the ship's stay in Colombo, the crew members are expected to visit some of the tourist attractions in the country. Concluding her official visit, the ship will depart the island on the 23rd of June 2023. That ends local news for now.
The main news story is brought to you by Siddha Lepa Veda Mahatmya.
The Minister of Public Security, Tiran Alas, has issued instructions to the Sri Lanka police to take immediate action against violent crimes being carried out in the southern and western provinces. According to Minister Alas, instructions have been issued to the Inspector General of Police and senior police officers in this regard. The IGP and senior police officers have been ordered to take immediate and stern action against violent crimes in the southern and western provinces. He further stated that a grace period has been granted until July 31st, 2023 to surrender unauthorized or unlicensed firearms. The directive comes after several incidents of shooting were reported in both the southern and western provinces over the last few weeks. That was the main news story.
The main news story was brought to you by Siddhalepa Vedamahatmya.
And on Watch Light tonight, recent studies found that 1 in every 5 Sri Lankans have experienced depression at some point in their lives. The study, which was conducted on patient data submitted between 2000 and 2023, found that depression is a major public health concern in Sri Lanka. Dr. Inosha Udara Alvis, lecturer, Department of Community Medicine, University of Peradeniya, says if someone has any idea that depression is something like a fleeting thought of sadness, it's actually something much more complex and something different to that. Due to the high risk of among university students, it is imperative to develop psychosocial interventions to ensure early detection of mental health disorders and provide adequate support to safeguard this vulnerable population. That came to you in Watchlight. Moving on with world news and the headlines first. The missing Titanic sub running out of oxygen. Ukraine hits bridge linking Crimea to mainland. At least 209 Pakistanis among victims of Greece boat wreck. 5 people aboard a missing submersible near the wreck of the Titanic had just hours left of their presumed air supply on Thursday, the 5th day of a massive multinational search across thousands of square miles in the remote North Atlantic. The Miniman-sized Titan, operated by US-based Ocean Gate Expeditions, began its descent at 8 a.m. on Sunday, but lost contact with its support ship near the end of what should have been a 2-hour dive to the century-old shipwreck. Ukrainian missiles struck one of the few bridges linking to Crimea Peninsula with the Ukrainian mainland yesterday, early on Thursday, cutting one of the main supply routes for Russian occupation forces in southern Ukraine as Kyiv pushes to drive them out. Vladimir Saldo, the head of the Russian-installed administration in occupied parts of Ukraine's Kherson province, released video of himself on the Konhara Road bridge, where craters had been blasted through asphalt. At least 209 Pakistanis were among those who lost their lives in a boat wreck off Greece last week, according to data shared by the Pakistani Investigative Agency. Information provided to the Federal Information Agency by families of missing passengers known to have boarded the boat that capsized off Greece's coast suggest the death toll may be significantly higher than official figures. Greek authorities say the number of victims stands at 82 and the number of survivors at 104, of whom 12 were Pakistanis. Back to the world news headlines. The missing Titanic sub running out of oxygen. Ukraine hits bridge linking Crimea to mainland. At least 209 Pakistanis among victims of Greece boat wreck. That ends world news.
Development News is brought to you by
Vacancies for women from Desha Sri Lanka for housemaids in Kuwait, Oman and Saudi Arabia for ages 23 to 58 years. Contact number 037 7500 500.
And on development news, the construction of the second passenger terminal at the Bandaranaike International Airport, which had been temporarily halted due to the recent economic downturn in the country, resumed. The decision to temporarily halt construction was made following the suspension of Japan's JICA loan facility, which occurred shortly after the country was declared financially bankrupt. Currently, the government is engaged in discussions with the International Monetary Fund regarding necessary restructuring. The construction is being carried out by Sri Lanka's Access Engineering Company under the supervision of Japan Airport Consultants Incorporated. The event was attended by Ports, Shipping and Aviation Minister Nima Siripala de Silva, Secretary to the Ministry KDS Ruan Chandra, AASL Chairman Major General Retired G.A. Chandrasiri and officials from the consultancy and construction institutions. A sum of 500 million rupees has been utilized as expenditure by the AASL for this construction. That came to you in Development News.
Vacancies for women from Deshakti Lanka for housekeepers, home cooks, caretakers and home nurses in Kuwait, Oman, Saudi Arabia and Singapore for ages 23 to 57 years. Salaries starting from 156,000 rupees. Interviews with foreign agents are now on. Come whether you have a passport or not. Branches, Colombo, Kurunagala, Anuradhapura and Matara. Contact number 0377 500 500.
Sports news. Brian Pereira, representing the Ceylon Motorsports Club, qualified for the finals in the Olympic Esports Series 2023, scheduled to be conducted by the International Olympic Committee. The Federation Internationale d'Automobile and Gran Turismo. Brian has been racing since 2007. He started out in karts and moved on to compete in the Formula McLaren's 1300 LGB, and the following year he won the Formula EFY Championships and later moved on to winning the Formula Junior Championship and finished fourth in the Formula BMW in India. That came to you in Sports News.
Go ekak thiyana youth ekata life ekේ change ekata niyamata set wenna as wahagena dagapu hina habe karanna youth ekata niyamata set wenna friendship ekaka menna.
The all-new NSB Ithru Mithru account, NSB IAM, a plan for your dream.
Business News, sponsored by National Savings Bank, the safest place for your money.
Allianz Lanka, a member of the Munich-based global insurance powerhouse, Allianz SC, has taken a significant step towards promoting sustainable development and ensuring access to clean water in Sri Lanka. This has been accomplished through the installation and donation of a state-of-the-art clean drinking water system in Higgaswatha Primary School in Kuruvita in Sabaragama Province. This initiative is in line with Allianz Lanka's commitment to fulfilling UN Sustainable Development Goal number 6, clean water and sanitation for all. That came to you in Business News.
Business News, sponsored by National Savings Bank, the safest place for your money.
Go ekak thiyana youth ekata life ekේ change ekata niyamata set wenna as wahagena dagapu hina habe karanna youth ekata niyamata set wenna friendship ekaka menna.
The all-new NSB Ithru Mithru account, NSB IAM, a plan for your dream.
Moving on with economic news, Sri Lanka has to monitor and regulate private tuition, which has become a 65 billion rupee a year industry, State Minister of Higher Education Suren Raghavan said. Raghavan told reporters the tuition industry has to be regulated and monitored. The tuition industry has to be regulated. It has been reported that the industry earns 65 billion rupees an annum. Parents in Sri Lanka are spending a lot of money for private education due to shortcomings in the state education system and limited slots in the universities. That came to you in economic news.
Weather report.
The Meteorology Department says several spells of showers will occur in the western and Sabaragama provinces and in Kandy, Nuwara, Galle and Matara districts. A few showers will occur in the northern and northwestern provinces. Showers or thunder showers may occur at a few places in the Uva province and in Ampara and Batticaloa districts during the evening or night. Fairly strong winds, about 40 to 45 kilometers per hour, can be expected at times in the western slopes of the Central Hills, northern and north central province and in Puttalam, Hambantota and Trincomalee districts. That was the weather report, and now to end this news broadcast, the main points once again. President Wickremesinghe sets ambitious timeline for Sri Lanka's debt restructuring and reconciliation efforts. The government orders crackdown on gun violence. Malaysia to increase flights to Sri Lanka. Substantial allowance increment for the army after absence of 4 years. The Navy apprehends 22 Indian fishermen poaching in northern waters. Taka Zushi DD-107 of Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force arrives at the port of Colombo. And on international news, the missing Titanic sub running out of oxygen. And on sports news, Brian Pereira qualifies for the Olympic Esports Series 2023 in Singapore. That ends this news broadcast.